All right, I think we're ready to go. So you guys do have the benefit of me learning as we go. So the first time that I did this and I wanted to record it, I had somebody, stand up and do the shaky cam and record it. I did that twice. And then the third time I had Todd who stood up and held it. And then he said, I'm not doing that anymore. So he went out and got the tripod. And then when I was watching those videos, I noticed that as I'm further away, I wanted to capture the screen and the presentation. I was picking up a lot of background noise because it was picking up from the microphone of the camera, not from what I was saying. So I went out and got a microphone. So as we develop this and grow, you'll see more changes. So eventually we got this so that as the teams are making their own safety videos, they can just attach their cell phones right to that, use the microphone, and then grow from there. So SafeStart 2019. The reason why we're doing this, and this is probably the third year that we've done something like this, is that as we get back into the swing of things, all of our metrics reset, we want to start over again, but we want to start with a positive note. Safety is one of those things that if you're not ready, from day one, you can shoot yourself literally sometimes right in the foot before you even start. That's where we're at right now with FlowServe, and that we set a goal of 0 lost time accidents, 0 recordables, 0 injuries, and we've already had 2 lost time accidents across FlowServe. And that was, probably 13 days ago. So within the first few days of coming back from vacation, people went to the hospital and were out of work.
Here?
No, not here. Not here. Obviously not here. So that's why we focus on this, because we want to, again, have that 0 injury mentality, but we want to make sure that we're focused on it from day one. So my agenda that I have up here, I'm going to run through the corporate safety message. So at the end of 2018, corporate sent out like a toolbox talk. Some people saw that, some people didn't. So what I'm going to do is I've got that in the presentation. I'm going to hit some high points on that, as we work through it. And then what corporate has been doing is, as we have these kind of accidents or things happen around the facility, I get sent global safety actions. Some of these are just go do, sometimes they're presentations, sometimes they're toolbox talks. I'm on the hook to make sure that I do this. Some of them, they'll say, hey, we had an issue in a welding department, go look to see if you have that incident or that same kind of scenario in your welding department. This one doesn't really fit for a toolbox talk, so we're going to run through hammer injury prevention. And some of it is going to be fairly straightforward, because we're not talking about hammers falling from the sky and hitting people. We're talking about people that are hitting themselves with hammers or hitting other people with hammers, those kind of situations. So what can we do to prevent those? As we go through the year, I'm going to develop a series of reminders to say that when it comes to safety, here's what we always need to be focused on. And they're going to be somewhat repetitive, much like when we go to the quarterly meeting and they remind you, hey, if you get married or have kids, please call Human Resources so you can get your benefits updated. And you're probably thinking now, hey, I'm not getting married again. I'm not having any more kids, so I'm not going to pay attention to this reminder. 5 months later, guess what? I'm married again. I'm not having any more kids, definitely not that. But now that I'm hearing those reminders, I can say, okay, I know what to do. So I want to do that. So right now we're starting off with, kind of refreshing some things around safety rule violations, hand safety, lifting safety, and then I'm going to finish with some next steps, to where I'm going to talk more about the whole idea of using video cameras and doing safety training, and how are we going to elevate our own safety culture to that next level. So back to work safety. What are the risks? What are the challenges? I'm not the kind of guy that's wearing my gloves when I'm carrying boxes at home. I don't always put on my safety glasses when I'm working, in the yard or in my basement or any of those things. So I may lose sight of some of those safety, behaviors that we have within our facility. So when I come back, I have to reacclimate. So I took about 2.5 weeks off at the end of December. When I come back, am I ready to work? It may not matter for me as much. I'm not using hammers. I'm not using lathes, drills, mills. I'm not handling too many heavy things, but employees that are, where is their mind? So of course we've got things that the holiday distractions. You ever have holiday fatigue? To where you go on vacation or you do a lot of traveling, and when you get home, you're more tired than when you left. You need a vacation from your vacation, but you can't take one. Now the next day you're back at work. So you have those kind of things that are going to kind of slow you down or give you gaps. Then of course the loss of routine, complacency, and then those breakdowns of safety habits. Say that every day you put on your gloves and your glasses, and then you stop doing that for 2 weeks. You may show up to work, January 1 or 2, and not even have your gloves with you. So that's why it's important. So when we talk about that corporate safety message, the first thing is we got to regain that focus. For us as a facility, I'm going to be honest, I don't think that, we have too far to go to regain that focus. We have a very strong safety culture, and as we hear from other facilities, and we'll talk about even some of our metrics and how we stack up against other facilities within FlowServe, we'd have to fall pretty far to really get to a point where we're losing that focus. I mean, when we got back from vacation, immediately I'm hit with an observation because we didn't send out the pure safety calendar soon enough for some employees. Employees are coming back and they're remembering where we left off in December, and they're like, keep pace with us. So, but we have to make sure that we're always keeping an eye on what we want to accomplish. And then hazards in the workplace. So we're going to talk about hammer injury prevention. And even after I gave this presentation, people went out and looked at their hammers and realized some of those hammers were damaged. And we said in one case, they're like, hey, we're not even using the hammer the way it's supposed to be used. They have an insert they have to put inside the part, and then they use the back of the hammer to kind of knock that out, and it damages the hammer. And they're like, hey, Vince, you said if there's any situation where we're using a hammer where, it's not, we should talk about it. And we're like, we've always done it this way. So again, with regard to hazards in the workplace and you're coming back from vacation, let's look at your hazards as if today is your first day. Let's say you've never done this before. You're going to pick up a tool. You're going to do a task. Ask that question, hey, am I overlooking something? And sometimes you may say, hey, this is the way I was trained to do it. This is the way that I've always done it. But is it the right way? Because if you're not paying attention, that's what's going to bite you in the butt later on. So then stop work authority, and I'm going to keep coming back to this, not just through this presentation, but throughout 2019 and beyond. Because everything that we do starts with stop work. If I'm going to tell you follow procedures, or wear your PPE, or do this, and you're going to take that as gospel, well, then we may run into problems, because sometimes it may not make sense. If I say always wear your gloves, and you go, hey, Vince, what about this situation? That's stop work. That's a situation where you've heard the message and you're applying it to your situation. So we rolled out hand safety policy 2017, and we told people, hey, new rule, wear your gloves for all operational tasks. 2018, we saw a spike in finger amputations because people were told to wear their gloves, so they were wearing them, even in situations where they shouldn't be wearing them. They weren't stopping and asking, hey, you told me to do this, it doesn't make sense. Vince, you're going to tell me how to use a hammer? When was the last time you even used a hammer? So take, especially if I'm telling you something, take it with a grain of salt. Ask questions, question authority. So we want to focus on that 0 injuries. For us in Kalamazoo, we had 1 doctor case last year. I think we had 1 in 2017. We're about that far away from just being 0, period. We want to get to 0 injuries in 2019 and beyond. And and I've talked with a couple of employees about the evolution of safety. When I first started doing safety, it was all my responsibility. And then all of a sudden it became a plant manager's responsibility, and I was there to help him. And then from there, it went to the plant manager's staff. And then it went to frontline supervisors that were responsible for safety. And then now we're at that point where, at least Kalamazoo is, where we're driving that responsibility and that ownership down to each and every employee. Oh, I skipped safety team. There was a time when it was the safety team, and we need to have a shop safety team, and they'll manage safety. And then this is where we're at now, where employees are turning to the safety teams to say, hey, manage our safety, protect us. Well, now we need to move further down to where the employees are saying, hey, you know what? These are my hands. I'm going to say how I'm going to protect them. And then everybody else becomes supporting that initiative. So 0 injuries. So our performance in 2018, obviously we had 0 lost time accidents. That puts us over 4 million hours since our last lost time accident. And that's something that I don't think we've ever done. Gone 4 million hours. So the most we've gone is probably just over 3 million hours. And that was up until our last one that we had in 2013. So every day, every hour is a new record for us. We had one doctor case, but that because we worked so many hours, that puts us still in the green with regard to that corporate objective. I wouldn't say green because somebody got hurt, and we don't want to say, hey, it's a great thing that we're green, but somebody's hurt. But it's never good when somebody gets hurt. 4 first aid incidents, 13 near-miss incidents. And then when you look at our total observations, we set a goal back, I think starting 2015, to submit 2,000 observations. And every year since then, we hit just over 2,000. We don't want to bump it up to 3,000 because that will just put too much of a focus on the number. But what we've been trying to do is how do we increase the quality of those observations? Instead of saying, hey, I saw a mess on the floor, I cleaned it up. Great observation. But, hey, I saw a mess on the floor, I tracked back where the mess was coming from, I called maintenance, and they're going to fix that. I saw something, I addressed it, I saw the employee, he made the mess, we had a conversation about how to properly leave a work area. So how do we take even the simplest things that we see and take that next step to say that, hey, I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. So we want to stay at about that 2,000, so you're going to hear the same thing in 2019, but how do we increase the quality of those observations? So now, with those observations, I took our best 625 and I put them in the corporate Revo system. So corporate sees the scope and the types of observations that we're reporting. Now, I just saw the updated numbers. We submitted the most observations from one facility in the Revo system throughout Flowserve. And we didn't even put 50% of our observations in the system. So I know Tlaxcala has a similar setup that we do where employees report everything and then they put the best ones in, but I think they started seeing what we were doing and started to up their game a little bit, but they didn't surpass us. So, and of course, when we talk, the other highlight up there that is also impressive about it, 2018, 99.9% complete for pure safety training.
What accounts for the 0.1?
So that really is 4 employees that didn't do all of their modules. And of those 4 employees, that's 5 modules that weren't done. And that's not saying that they didn't do them. I did not get, either a record from my report that they did it, a supervisor didn't tell me that they did it, that employee didn't come to me and say, hey, I did that, but there was a problem with the system. They might have done it, I just didn't get. And what makes it impressive, that's by the end of the year. So the supervisor that had some of the employees was like, no, I'm sure that employee did it. I'm sure he did too, but we're in the new year now. So we're at 99.9 for 2018. He might have done it, but as of December 31st, that's the number that I have. And that's impressive because every other year we were well into, the first, second, third week of January where people still scrambling to get their pure safety done for the previous year. And then some people just gave up because they started working on the next month's module. But that's impressive for us. So again, we're that far from 100%. So I'm going to run into the hammer injury prevention. And again, it's not, and as I went through this for some of the teams, some people, they're going to chuckle because it's one of those, and that's why there's a big focus on it, because it's easily preventable. I'm not going to blow your minds with, oh my God, I didn't know a hammer could do that. Hit your hand. Vince, if you had just told me not to put my hand where the hammer is going to go, I wouldn't have hit my hand. It doesn't work like that. So, a couple of the basic safety rules that tie into this presentation. Again, stop work is number one. So if somebody says, hey, here's the hammer, here's what I want you to do. Go do this task. And you're like, I don't know. That looks like I might hit my hand or my knee or someone else. Stop and ask those questions. And that leads into STAR, stop, think, act, and review. I have a hammer in my hand. Let me look at the hammer. Let me inspect it. Let me make sure that it's the right hammer for the task. So, asking those questions before you begin. Follow procedures. And again, follow procedures is third on the list. Once you've asked those questions, you've looked at the process, it makes sense to you, you're comfortable, now follow those procedures. PPE falls in there. Working smart is where you're starting to tie it all together. You're saying, hey, here's what Vince said. Here's what I understand about OSHA, EPA, DOT, whatever. My lead told me this. My supervisor, these are my experiences. Let me tie it together and make those right decisions. So the objectives, I'm going to do review the 8 injuries we had with regard to hammers. How do we not say eliminate hammer usage, but in those situations where the hammer isn't the right tool. Maybe at the time that we created that task, hammer was the best available technology. But maybe there's better technology out there. And then when we say, okay, Vince, it's a nail, it's a block of wood, how do you want me to do this? Let's step through some things to say that, hey, before you use that hammer, let's make sure you're prepared. So you look at 2017, you look at 2018, as of May, 2017 hammer injuries accounted for 5% of the injuries. As of May 2018, it accounted for 11%. And you're thinking, that's not a lot. But when you think of all the different ways that you can hurt yourself, it's like, wow, 11% with hammers. And again, it's things that people hit themselves with a hammer. You think, can we do something about that? So it is significant. So some of these injuries, the first one up there, the third one, those are I would say your legitimate accidents. Somebody is hammering something and the thing they hit fractures and a piece shoots off and hits somebody. Those are those situations where you're like, all right, could we have used better PPE? Could we have, positioned ourselves so we weren't? Yes, we could have, but you know what? You can't say hindsight's 20. You could say hindsight's 20/20, but there's no way you could have predicted that. That second one there, I don't know if you we had it up on the screensavers on some of the computers. That's the one that occurred in Tulsa, with regard to the employee that was using the defective hammer. The hammer wasn't true, wasn't straight, so when he swung, it didn't hit true and it deflected off of what he hit and he strained his arm. And you're thinking, well, why was he using a defective hammer? That was his hammer. Some people have their tools that they like to use, and that was his, and he used it all the time. If you have those situations, you pick up your hammer, we'll buy you a new one. It'll look just like your old one. I try, I promise. So then, this one up here, the employee holding the pipe had his finger struck. Hammer slipped and hit the thumb on his left hand, striking his left hand index finger on the right hand side of the tip of the finger. So again, you're striking things, hitting his finger during the process. And this last one down here swung and hit his own leg because he missed what he was swinging for. So these are all, they're not, none of it is going to be like, I didn't know you can do that. So these are highly preventable. So when we talk about hammer injury prevention, none of this is going to be rocket science either. So the first thing is doing those risk assessments. What are you doing with the hammer? Is it appropriate? Is it the right hammer? Is there a better tool? Do you need PPE? Is there an alternative way of doing that task? And then obviously inspecting your hammer. So these are 4 examples where you had tasks where you're using a hammer and they swapped it out for best available technology. You got a pneumatic rivet gun, a hydraulic bush pressing machine, hydraulic wrench, and then a stamping device. So like I said, maybe at the time that we started doing this task, the hammer is what we needed or used. But you might go to your supervisor and say, hey, Vince said there's a stamping machine that we can use for this. Let's investigate that. Let's keep pace with technology with regard to these tasks. So let's say you do need to use the hammer. So there's 7 things that we'll run through. The last 2, I'm going to add a caveat to. So obviously give yourself enough space to do the work. And in those situations where you say, Vince, man, the space is like this, and I got to put my hand in there. Well, can you wear a glove? Is there something else? Knowing that there's not enough space, what other things can we do? But start with giving yourself enough space. Get the right hammer. Do you need a ball peen hammer? Do you need a rubber mallet? You ever work on a task at home and you're rooting through your toolbox or whatever to find something that works? You know how many times I've gotten a wire hanger and started to bend it into different shapes to get the thing that I think will. No, let's take that extra time, order the device, the tool, the fixture that we need to do the job right. And then, of course, inspect for damage. And this is where I'm starting to see some observations coming back from the teams where, they're not always inspecting their tools. And I would say inspect everything. If you pick up anything, you pick up a pen, if it doesn't work, what do you throw it away? You don't put it, hopefully you don't put it back and hopefully, put it back so somebody else could find it. But, you throw it away, you get a new pen. You've got a gauge that's out of calibration. You take it in to get calibrated. You got a document that's not accurate or a print that's not right. You inspect it because that's only going to lead to errors down the line. And of course, if gloves are appropriate, if you're like, hey, every time I do this, I hit my hand with a hammer. Hey, let's get some gloves. They make logging gloves that if you're out logging and two logs come together and your hand's caught in the middle, it's going to protect your hand. So I'm sure we could find some gloves that if you decide to hit your hand with a hammer, we can protect you. Tool holders, we talked about at the very beginning. Mike's got tool holders. Is it something like that? A finger saver?
Yeah, something like that.
And then you've got, different things like this to say that, hey, rather than getting your hand right in there, what tool can we use so that if you do have to do some manual, your fingers or your hands not directly in the way. So these two, the last two, in my mind, are somewhat ridiculous. If I'm going to say, hey, hey Cameron, when you're using the hammer, don't hit your hand. You say, thanks, Vince. Yeah, I was planning on hitting my hand, but now that you said not to, I'm not going to. Nobody plans on hitting their hand. And the next one says, don't aim for any of your body parts. Nobody is aiming for their body part. You're aiming for the thing that you want to hit. It just so happens you miss. So the real question you should be asking yourselves when you pick up a hammer is, what happens if I miss? When we talk about lockout, tagout, we have that mental exercise to say that, hey, I'm getting ready to do this task. What happens if it turns on? How many people have dropped something in a garbage disposal? Just me. So what is that thought that runs through your mind when you reach your hand in there? You could be the only one at home, but you still say, hey man, if this turns on, my hand is a goner. Have that same thought when you're using a hammer. You're getting ready to hammer something, and you're like, man, if I miss, where's that hammer going? It's going to hit my hand, but I'm wearing a glove. It may sting a little bit. Or not going to hit my hand because I'm using a tool holder. You say, yeah, I've got a couple more good fingers. I'll just hold it so that if it hit my good finger. So, no, where is that hammer going? And then the last one, it says, don't aim for a body part. Nobody is aiming for their body part. It's not like you go, I aim for my knee and I accidentally hit the nail. It's the other way around. So, and again, stop work. If you're seeing this presentation and you're going back and you're grabbing a hammer, stop and think about what you're doing with that hammer. So some reminders I want to step through. Safety rule violations. So the reason we wanted to add this is because 2018, we started seeing a kind of like an upswing in safety lapses. We have a policy that if you're using compressed air, you're wearing a face shield or you're wearing safety glasses with this, but we're starting to see more and more people not doing that. And and as new employees come to the team, we needed to make sure that we're reminding them as much as we do each other on a daily basis. So, I'm going to add more, and as we have issues with safety rule violations, we'll continue to discuss them here. And then on top of that, let's make sure that as we start getting those pushes to get work out, those pushes to make the hours or make the money, to make the shipments, that we're not compromising safety. Corporate, yes, they're going to push us and they're going to push us hard, but at no point will they ever say, hey, you made your financial numbers, we'll overlook those two recordables you had. That won't happen. And at no point will they accept in an accident investigation, we compromise safety. So let's not compromise safety. And as we have issues, let's make sure we're discussing them. Hand safety. So like I said, we had 2017, we rolled out a hand safety policy, and it had, I'm not going to use the word rules, I'm going to call them 2 foundational points that I'm going to say we're going to start with and then build those exceptions around them. So that first one is you wear your gloves for all operational tasks. That's foundational. So pushing a cart, carrying a box, carrying a part, let's just say that we're going to use our gloves all the time for these tasks. And when you say, but Vince, because I'm encouraging you to come to me and say, hey, Vince, what about this situation? What about when the part's real small and I can't pick it up because I'm wearing gloves? We'll add that to the exception list. Hey, what if it's a electro-polished part and, we'll damage the... Okay, we'll add that to... But we need to have those discussions and then make sure that we're vetting it out across the teams and we're rolling it out fairly. So if you have those situations, please, let's talk about it. On the flip side, the other foundational thing, don't wear gloves around rotating equipment. Now, we run into situations where, like in grinding, they wear nitrile gloves. They say, hey, Vince, if I take my gloves off and you use grinding, I'm going to have contact dermatitis. All of us will. So I'm like, all right, wear nitrile gloves to protect you from the coolant. Similarly, in another department, they say, hey, you know what, I'm carrying a pan and I'm cutting things, with a saw, and I'm carrying a pan, I'm going back and forth. I may forget to take my gloves off. I'm like, I don't want that to happen, so you don't have to wear gloves in that situation. But those are discussion points that we're having. So foundationally, wear your gloves for operational tasks. Don't wear gloves around rotating equipment, and we'll just manage those exceptions as they come up. Lifting safety, who doesn't know not to lift more than 50 pounds? Where I see this, cropping up is with newer employees that, new employees that want to fit in, that want to stay here, that oftentimes don't have that mentality of stop work. So that if I say, hey, you know what, come here, come with me, pick that box up, take it to my office. They may not stop and go, hey, Vince, how heavy is that box? Do I need another person to help me do that? Do I need a cart? No, what they're hearing is that direction without that mentality of the stop work mentality. So if you have something that's greater than 50 pounds, and that's just if it's a normal lift. Now, if it's above your head or below your knees, that 50 pounds may be out the window. So those next steps, we want to improve our performance. So there's a couple of points up there that if you want, you can read through them. But I'm a firm believer that the next step for our safety culture is your feedback. We're at that foundational level where everybody has to take ownership of safety. So it's one of the numbers that I really like is that we kind of lead the organization in observations. Our culture on observations is probably the benchmark. So, but we submit about 2,000 observations, and we have about 400 employees. I would say 30% did not submit an observation in 2018. I would probably go so far as mostly office people, the engineers. And I'd say probably another 25, 30% submitted 1 or 2 observations just so they could tell their supervisor that they submitted an observation. And the bulk of our engagement is coming from that 40%. So the question is, what happens, what does our culture look like if everybody's submitting observations and buying into that. So that's that challenge for us. And I'm not talking everybody submit 15 observations or 100 observations. I'm saying everybody is actively looking for ways to improve safety. Because that next elevation for our culture is each one of you going, hey, I don't want to get hurt today. I don't want to see anybody get hurt today. So you know what? I'm going to raise up issues. I'm going to address things. So there's different tools we can use, the job safety analysis. I had a bunch of these risk assessment tools made. I've got to find them. And what they do is you hand them out, and sometimes for some people, safety is all or nothing. Vince, we need to fix all of these issues all the time and right now. But a risk assessment tool allows you to go, what's the severity of this happening? Well, somebody might get a laceration. What's the frequency? Well, it's never happened. So all of a sudden you go, okay, maybe I'll just make an observation, and then we'll just track it to see if something else happens. Or if you're like, man, I saw a guy up on the roof dancing a jig on the edge, that severity all of a sudden, literally goes to the roof. And then that frequency is right now. So those are the things we need to address. So this tool allows us to kind of stratify what those observations look like. And stop, think, act, and review. I encourage everybody to do that. And it doesn't have to be like, hey, I'm going to go get somebody and we're going to spend the next 10 minutes looking at this task. It could be, I'm getting ready to do something. Let me take a breath and think about what I'm getting ready to do. Am I ready? And that could be all it takes. So I'm going to finish with this and come back to why I'm recording this. So, a couple of us have been thinking about what that next level looks like. 2014, we rolled out observations. And for FlowServe at that time, that was way out there. So 2015, 2,000 observations, 16, 17, 18, 2,000 observations. Employees are internalizing it. 2018, corporate rolls out their own observation program. And so eventually other facilities will start to do what we're doing. And maybe they might start surpassing us. So the challenge for us is, what do we do now? What's next? And that's why we've been talking about making safety videos. Rather than submit an observation, why not just make a little, who remembers Vine? Where's the young people at? Or cool people? So Vine was just a social media platform which was like 7-second videos. You just made 7-second video, you uploaded it, and you tried to be funny and clever in 7 seconds. And there was these snippets of videos that would you just post them, and it went under, so nobody uses it anymore. But we want to be able to do that, to say that, hey, I've got one safety issue right here that, and I have had some people say, we should do a safety video on what happens if a guest or somebody comes to the shop entrance. You just make a video, this is what happens, and you distribute that. What happens if you've got a seal that you don't know how to lift? What do we do? What if somebody puts a pop in a flammable cabinet? What do you do? We've already got that video. So, just simple things like that. So rather than writing an observation, hey, Vince, can I borrow the tripod and the thing? We're going to make some videos. And then that becomes our new thing. And I'm working on a page within our SharePoint. We'll create like a YouTube kind of thing where you click on it, and now you see all of these videos. You just click on it and say, hey, anybody on the emergency response team? So the emergency response team, well, there we go, you in the back. The emergency response team, they do little drills. They'll do a heart attack, a stroke. I think they did one where somebody fell down the stairs. They had a seizure. And I said, well, what if we had recorded that? What if we had recorded you doing that drill? And then now when we do training for emergency response team members, they don't have to wait for the next drill. They could sit down and watch the videos of all the previous drills. So we were talking about making a catalog of those as well. So, but I say that because that's an idea. What I want is everybody to be thinking about, what are your ideas? You know, what are those things that you're like, hey, if you want to push our safety culture, we should be doing this next. Let's do that. Because employee engagement is that next level. And then one day somebody's going to come to me, hey, Vince, I know the level after that. And then, because I can't even imagine that yet. So, any questions? Make sure everybody's signed in. Thank you, guys. I know, I'm boring. I'm sorry. If you want, you can watch the video. If you fell asleep and you missed a part, I can put the video and you guys can watch it again. No, you're good. You're good? All right. Thank you guys very much.